Edie Stringfellow is the Vice President of Ecosystem Development for the Center of Global Innovation here in Atlanta. So among the many reasons we're really happy to have her here is that she's a representative of this city's incredible richness medically and particularly in the area of disease and research. So we couldn't be happier to have her, and in her role, among other things, Dr. Stringfellow helps life science companies recruit and reflect in their clinical trials more diverse populations. So it's incredibly important work. And today she's going to speak on the nuts and bolts of clinical research, and it's really going to be focused on what we can all do, what you can all do to participate in clinical trials, what clinical trials are about, and how they're really important to moving ahead with the continuing research and continuing treatments of narcolepsy. So please welcome Dr. Stringfellow.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Edie Stringfellow. I am the Vice President of Ecosystem Development for the Center of Global Health Innovation that's being built out right here in Milltown, Atlanta, and opens up next year. And I'm also your honorary mayor of the Global Health Innovation District, just to give you a bird's eye view of what's going to take place in Atlanta over the next few years. You are on the cusp of witnessing the repurposing of the flame of this city. And I'm so honored to have you here. You can be anywhere in the world right now. You choose to be here, and I'm grateful and humbled by this opportunity. I would like to start off by letting you know what we're going to cover. And I'm not going to get too detailed, and I'll be available afterwards to answer questions. But my whole focus of today's talk is to talk about you in particular. As a clinical researcher, as a code cracker, as someone who's in the lab, formerly in a lab, I depend on you and the patient community as if my life depends on it. And everything that you do, those in the medical profession are grateful for all the hundreds of millions of patient volunteers. We cannot advance research without your help. So thank you for being here and for this talk. And right here, this is just going to be some of the things that we are going to cover. Notes on the E string, and that's me. And that's talking about my why, because I originally didn't start out in this field. I spent 15 years in sports and entertainment. I was ESPN's first Black woman director in production, and I covered football and international football. So I was grateful to be at Super Bowls. I was grateful to cover the Italian Serie A. I'm a Juventus girl, if anyone else is out there. The English Premier League. I've worked in Pretoria, South Africa. Worked on 3 film projects in Germany. But unfortunately, my family back in the United States was dying from something called sickle cell disease. I did not know enough about it, and we came from a middle-class background and had resources up the wazoo. Now, my family was treated horribly by the medical community, and then I saw firsthand how we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system. And the biases that takes place against people with certain types of diseases and disorders are horrific. So I decided to go back to school in my 30s and reinvent myself. And that is my why. So notes in an E string is I'm a former musician, I'm a former sports and entertainment person, and when I come out with my journey to my why, because you're here because of your whys, I called it notes on the E string. And then we're just going to talk about the basics when you start in a clinical trial. So when you get that phone call from a clinical research coordinator or someone that reaches out to you through a registry to ask if you'd like to participate in the clinical trials, I'm here to answer any of your questions that may cause you deliberation or hesitancy and walk you through that process and to hold your hand to let you know that there are protections and safeties in place that were not available 10 or 20 years ago. And then we're going to talk about the different phases of the clinical trial and study design. Who participates, who's asked, who's excluded, who's included, how do you go about that? Because we are asking of the patient community not to just participate in this clinical trial, but to be part of the research, give us feedback. And it could be anywhere from a 4-year to a 25-year to a lifetime commitment. So let's get started. We don't have to go over this. You'll have access to the slides, but this just gives you an idea. It's never too late to repurpose yourself and to find your why, and know that the greater good is bigger than you, and that we need everybody on the forefront of the fight to solve for medical crises and to participate in solving for and improving and extending the quality of life of each of everyone in this room and the 5 billion plus people around the world. So this just gives you an idea of what some of my background covers and what some of my responsibilities are. And that is for me to scour the planet and to find some of the best molecule hunters, some of the best researchers, some of the companies that's working on cutting edge research and bring them into one area. We are siloed and we are fractured as an industry. Oh, you could go ahead and if you have a question, please feel free to ask anytime. And with that being said, I also serve as an ambassador of how we're repurposing the flame and how Atlanta is leveraging its relationships with community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, how we have the CDC, Emory, Georgia Tech, Morehouse School of Medicine. And we're going to talk about why the historically black colleges and universities and medical school systems are so important when it comes to clinical research. And they're trusting my vision that I can actually see from here. Okay, so that's the reason I have to keep turning back around to see which slide we're on. So we're gonna talk about the nuts and bolts of the clinical research areas. And how do you get started? And the reason I say that the patients are in the driver's seat is because never before have you been able to dictate direction. It's always been top down. It always the medical community come up with a drug and we're going to try to find people that have this indication that it work with. Now it's top up. You tell us what's important. You tell us what's keeping you up at night. What is affecting your livelihood? What's affecting your family? So the patients are in the driver's seat and they're steering us down the right way for research. And you ask, what is clinical research? It's simple. It's a component of medical and health research areas that are valuable in understanding human disease, preventing and treating illness, and promoting health. And that's what we do. We look for ways to improve and extend the quality of life for you, for me, for everyone that's involved. And in some areas, we are going to go through when clinical research what takes precedent, like how we had to pivot for COVID and to collectively solve for COVID. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. And then a continuum of studies of involving interactions with patients. So it's the efficacy rates that we're judging over time due to age, due to climate, due to environment. There's so many different aspects that we take into consideration for clinical research. And then once you've taken in all this information, you have to make that decision to see if it is right for you, if it is for you to participate. Because remember, it's all volunteer. You are not being forced, and you can withdraw at any time. And we're going to start off with the basics, understanding your role in clinical research. And when we say understanding your role, who can participate in clinical research? It can be anyone that's a healthy person or a healthy perceived person. It could be someone that has a high risk for disease or someone that may be diagnosed or may be pre-diabetic for a disease, and see how can we be preventive and it going any further. And then understanding the terminology that we're going to hear throughout the presentation, research study. We're going to talk about what experiments are. And again, experiments are how are we reacting? How are we measuring efficacy rates? How effective is a drug on a certain population? And then medical research, we're going to continue talking about global public health medical research, biomedical innovation research, and then clinical trials. And that's what we're going to talk about, the nuts and bolts and our main focus of the discussion. First and foremost, remember, volunteering for a clinical trial is a personal choice. And you're going to see some slides written out more so than others, just to be considerate of those who may have hearing impairments, reading impairments. As you can see, my vision is awful, so I have to focus on sometimes too to make sure that I can see points and indications. So after you see that it's voluntary, you go through all of the protocol information, and I'll give you a sample of that, and then you'll see if you're going to enroll in a study, if you want to stay in a study, and if you're going to leave a study. And we don't want you leaving studies unless you absolutely have to, but we also want you to know that it's volunteer. And what are some of the reasons that people volunteer? It's an integral part of the research process. Please keep in mind that we cannot advance any type of medical research without patient volunteers. And your participation is greater than you, it's bigger than you. You can be that code cracker that unlocks solving some type of cancer. You can be that code cracker that is unlocking all types of indications. Without volunteers, biomedical research simply is not possible. Now, reasons for volunteering. Everyone has a different reason for volunteering. Some people want to do it to help improve medical care. Like, say, for my background, my family is riddled with sickle cell disease. I have sickle cell trait. So my family, I participate and I serve as a patient volunteer ambassador to show people the pros and cons, because it is risk involved in participating in clinical trials. And I will not stand here and pretend that there isn't. But I do help people walk through that process as a person who's done it themselves. And you could just be simply interested in science and advancing science. So we all have different reasons for why we want to participate in clinical trials. And how do you get involved? These are some of the criteria that we have to get involved, and I'll be on hand to walk you through some of these. So say, for example, you have clinicaltrials.gov. That's a starting point that any one of us can go to. Say if your family is plagued with heart disease and you go through a sort criteria on clinical trials to see if there's some clinical trial that you can participate in that's in your area and you fit the criteria. Because remember, part of being with clinical trials, like some of the companies that you have listed, H3, Jazz Pharmaceuticals, they can't advance without your participation. And so we help you make it easier. We try our best to remove some of the patient burden and help you connect and get those questions answered so you can talk directly to a clinical research coordinator when you have a question. Their information is available when you go to clinicaltrials.gov. And then there's also different ways to consult and connect with that study staff. They are available. I'm here to help demystify some of that, and they will answer any of the questions that you have. And this is another area that you could go to see if the National Research Volunteer Registry and researchmatch.org. So what I can do, if we can find some downtime, we can pull up a laptop and we can use anyone for an example. We can also use me for an example. And making an informed decision, informed consent is extremely important. And some of you may be thinking about, what about Henrietta Lacks? What happened with the Tuskegee experiment? What has happened over time? We put safeguards into place where we have watchdogs and we have protections and we have safeties that were not there when they failed populations in the past. No study is perfect, but we're doing the best that we can, and we need your feedback on any of these studies so that we can improve on them, improve on the process. The risk and the benefits, and make sure to ask all different types of questions. There is never a dumb question. There's never a stupid question, because trust me, there's someone out there that has exact same questions that you may have. And again, this is just to give you an idea of what are some of the protections and rights and some of the organizations that are involved to make sure that your HIPAA laws are protected, your medical history is protected, that you're being safeguarded. And you say, well, I want to participate in a clinical trial, but I'm not sure what questions do I ask the doctor. So I put some together to help you understand, or just to give you an idea. And this is a small list because you're going to have so many different questions that you're going to ask doctors or the nurse practitioners or the research coordinators. But I just want to give you an idea what are some of the questions that you can ask the doctor. And remember, ask them absolutely anything. And also be very honest about some of the drugs that you're already on so that we can be aware of any type of drug interactions. Anything, all of it takes place, all of it matters: age, environment, climate, diet, exercise, sleep. We're here for the Narcolepsy Network, so sleep is very important to monitor too. And this, again, is just giving you a comparison of how, and we talked about that earlier, new ways versus old ways of clinical research. It was always top down. But now you're in the driver's seat. So you communicate to your doctors. You can also go to the websites that I provided to let them know, you know what, my family is being afflicted by this, but I do not see, thank you, I do not see where this disorder is being researched. That means somebody's going to be out there and take notice. And this just gives you an idea of how simple it was. I'm not sure how many people here, by a raise of hands, how many participated in a sleep study, sleep apnea, or narcolepsy study in this room? So you can imagine, remember how you have to be in a room, you're being watched by 15 people like your lab rat, you have to put the creases in your head, you have to attach the things to your head, and when you have thick curly hair, that does not feel good because it takes forever for them to pull those things out. And then you have people watching you sleeping, wake you up. That we really don't have to do much more of that. Now you can participate in sleep studies in your home. This is how advanced technology is through wearables that's being monitoring absolutely the slightest biorhythms that you can think of. And then we're going to talk about, quickly go through the phases of a clinical trial. So just you are aware of when I say that it is a lifetime commitment. And we want you to be aware of that. It's not going to be some type of scratch and sniff. You send back a survey, 15 questions. You are a partner in advancing biomedical research. Remember, this research is bigger than us, and the fellow man and woman to your left, to your right, across the country is depending on you. And this gives you an idea of all, it's only 4 major. You have the preclinical, and that's where we are in the preclinical area. We cover animal research because we have to be able to test it on animals before we test it on humans and in certain situations. So just being very honest with you about that. And animals are cared for. If you're here in Georgia, and the state of Georgia has one of the largest animal research areas through the University of Georgia and through its research institutes. And these are the different phases. And we're just going to go through which phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, where does it fall, how many people are participating, how long does that phase last, and what's taking place during those phases. And the phase 1 is when we start out, and you can have multiple sites running phase 1. So it's going to be a small group of 20 to 30 people, and that's where we start the collection process. He has to take his picture. I at least want to look like I'm smiling and cute for it. It is a Saturday morning after all. And then this is the exciting part, is when we get to the point where anyone can participate in a clinical trial, and the researchers are the ones gathering this information. This is the part that I love. And we're doing the problem solving. We're making sure we're gathering all the biospecimens, collecting all the background information for you. And it's so important for you to be as honest as possible when you are talking to the study teams. And again, if you take a look and see, it gives you an idea how long throughout the phases and how much time is going to be asked of you. But we're also relieving as much of the patient burden at the same time. We have remote clinical trials, decentralized clinical trials, so that you don't have to make the trip 1 or 2 hours to a medical research center. We have become so much advanced. We're partners in this research. We're working with patient advocacy groups. The pharmaceutical companies is working with the healthcare systems. So we are at a point that we've never been before, and I'm just appreciative of every one of you in this room, just even for considering being and learning more about clinical research. And phase 3 and phase 4 is where the development happens. And anything can happen in these areas, because remember, it's experimentation that's taking place, is research that's being conducted. Sometimes you have to inject chemicals into a biospecimen to speed up the process to see how a drug is going to interact in the body. So just to give you an idea of what is taking place behind the scenes during these trials, and remember, your clinical research team that you're working with sees you as a partner now, and you're going to have access to this information. So some of the important things about participating in the clinical trial is that not only you participating in research, you have access to cutting edge technology, and you are becoming more involved with your medical research and empowering yourself with your medical information. So we're going to wrap up the presentation, and Cindy or Amy can let me know if you want to have access to the presentation. I'm more than happy to share, or they'll share with you if you registered through WOVA. And again, this is just giving you a breakdown of the different aspects. And you can read this at your leisure. And I'm here to answer any questions. Again, this is to different types of approval, fast-tracked. You saw examples of fast-track real-time with COVID, Paxlovid, so many different tests taking place, monkeypox. And that's where some of these drugs fall into different categories. And again, we talked about why is it so important to create a diverse study population, because remember, we can't take a drug to market without working with different types of data sets to see how a drug is going to interact with a different population. So that basically covers just our introductory information on regards to a clinical trial. We can talk about study design, on how we recruit, the information consent, and where we recruit, how we recruit. Totally different than what we did 10 or 20 years ago. And we're making sure that, again, we're removing the patient burden, helping you not to have to travel, working around your work study, working around childcare, working around elder services. And again, this is where I wrap things up, and I say that I'm grateful for each and every one of you for considering learning more about clinical trials. I'm here to answer any questions to the best of my ability in regards to participating in a clinical trial. Doctors can't take their research any further without your help and assistance, and know that your contributions, we're being better ancestors. You have to ask yourself, what type of footprint do you want to leave? And then also, how can you establish becoming a better ancestor and living by example? And that's it for me. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'm here to answer questions about clinical research. Also here to answer questions for those who are not from Atlanta. I'm more happy to jump in on that, or just to get to know you. And I appreciate for your time, and I'll take some questions now. Cindy, we have a question. It's okay if they come to the mic, or?
Hi, I actually have applied for the research to be a candidate, but I'm always turned down because I have central sleep apnea versus obstructive. I guess my question is, how many people with narcolepsy also have central sleep apnea, since it starts up here, it's not obstructive? Is there a correlation?
Well, doctor, I personally have not worked on a narcolepsy study, so I would not be able to answer that question, but I don't want you to feel as if your question will go unanswered. So I'm going to ask if Cindy and the team, if we can track the questions that's being asked so that we can make sure that we get them answered. And also, please provide your contact information so we can follow up with you directly. That's the reason I love these talks. And make sure you exchange each other's contact information so you don't feel alone in this.
I'll go.
All right.
I live in Portugal now, and would I be eligible to participate virtually from Portugal?
Well, you probably will have to go to what we conduct site feasibility studies first to see what that population for that study is. Oh, okay. So we have to see what the population is around an area, because I'm quite sure if it's a sleep study, if they're looking for diverse populations, it's going to be something in Portugal, but depending on the site study that you have to go to first.
Okay.
And there are travel services available through some of the pharmaceutical companies to help you get to a site survey first.
Okay.
Not everyone does, but remember, we're going to go through, I'll see if we can pull up someone's laptop after this during the break, and we can go through examples to help you answer that question.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's often complicated across different countries, but many pharmaceutical companies offer travel to specific sites, when they do clinical trials. And that was actually naturally leading me to my questions. As you probably know, what's exciting right now is there's a shift from clinical trials in the lab or with clinicians, etc., to more remote clinical trials, which are much more convenient with patients.
Absolutely.
And also, I hope, actually, is that the FDA will be a bit more responsive to making clinical trials a bit less disruptive at times with patients, especially when they have other medication. Often the traditional clinical trials is you stop all your medication and then you try a new medication. But in a disease like narcolepsy, sometimes it's very disruptive. I mean, patients are already doing reasonably well, and of course we always start with patients who are not doing well, which bias a little bit the disease population as well. So I have these two questions. What do you think about digital clinical trial or clinical trial online? And also maybe what do you think should be is there ways that the FDA can be a little bit more open to clinical trials that will have a bit more of a naturalistic design, as that takes into account, the disruption that some of this trial can cause to the patients? And finally, I've been very frustrated also by children. Even so, they always say, "Oh my God, we can include children we want to include children in clinical trials." Every time you'd say, "Oh, but at least let's try to include 16 and older, which are very healthy, and they're often very good for clinical trials because they have good supervision, etc. And they suffer as much as the adults. Often they are just completely ignored and pushed to the end of any development."
Yeah, I for one find some aspects of the industry frustrating, especially when it comes to children of color dealing with sleep apnea. And being a woman of color, or just even being a woman, we're not listened to. It's that simple. Sometimes we just aren't listened to. I can't go through that. I don't want to go through that. I'm going to be as political and professional as I can right now. But what you just said is the medical community is still made up mostly of middle-aged Caucasian males that have superior complexes. And we are not listening to people that suffer from different types of indications and disorders because we go into biases. We go and we lean on what we know and what we've been taught for generations and decades. How's that going to change is getting more people from diverse backgrounds to raise their hands and to speak up and to use their voice. You are so much more powerful than you ever thought you could be. And strength is in numbers. Two people just connected, and we're talking probably about 0.02, 0.03 of the population that's being studied. 2 people are in this room. If I was a pharmaceutical company right now, and I know that they have to do blind studies, they can't approach you directly, but I would go onto this registration site and make sure that you're signed up so that they can find you. Because remember, at this point, when we participate in clinical research, it's mostly blind studies, so I can't tell who's the person submitting it. I can only go about the bioinformation that's been submitted to me. Second, I want the FDA to work with We have to embed digital technology when we talk about health equity. It's no way around it. We have to remove a lot of that patient burden for more patients to participate. It can be disruptive with different medications. It can be disruptive when you're dealing with comorbidities. But it also, let's talk about the social determinants of health. I have childcare issues. I have healthcare issues. I have transportation issues. I have mealtime issues. The nearest health centers are 2 to 3 hours away. How do we get people from rural populations to participate into clinical trials that don't have access to an Atlanta, Seattle, or Portland, or Buenos Aires, or don't have immediate access to that? But we're missing a lot of valuable data when we don't take advantage of mobile units, when we're not taking advantage of setting up clinical trials at places people are familiar at their churches, setting up clinical trials at places of worship, setting up clinical trials at wellness centers and at gyms, at places that people are already at. We don't have to reinvent the system, bring the clinical trials to them. And please, my contact information is up here. Shoot me an email where we'll answer your questions. Cindy will collect those, and we'll make sure we have your contact information to follow up with you directly. I appreciate your time, and that is mine, and thank you for being here.